Okay, so you think Rolls-Royce makes cars, the grille, the spirit of ecstasy leaning into the wind. A machine that costs more than most houses, built for people who stopped counting a long time ago. That's fair. The car exists, it carries the name, and it is magnificent. It just isn't made by Rolls-Royce. The Rolls-Royce, whose shares trade in London, hasn't built a car since the early 1970s. In 1998, the rights to the name and the badge went to BMW, reportedly for around £40 million. And since 2003, every Rolls-Royce car has been built by BMW at a factory in Goodwood, which leaves a question almost nobody asks. When that company let go of the only part of itself the public could recognize, it kept everything else. So what did it think it was keeping? Jet engines, or if open in the dash, large ones, the kind bolted under the wing of a Boeing 787 or an Airbus A350. Oh, each carrying a list price in the tens of millions of dollars. And this is where the arithmetic stops making sense. Rolls-Royce frequently sells those engines for less than they cost to build. Not through weak pricing or bad luck. Deliberately. A wide-body engine order, the kind that makes the business pages billions of dollars, an airline signing for 50 aircraft, is, in pure cash terms, closer to a bill than a payday. Rolls-Royce hands over the hardware and absorbs the loss. So if the product loses money every time it leaves the factory, what exactly is the business? Not manufacturing. Rolls-Royce manufactures. But that's the delivery mechanism, not the model. What it actually runs is closer to a utility. It installs a meter on someone else's aircraft and then gets paid by the hour for the next 25 years. The engine is the meter. The flying is the product. Before we get to the meter, look at how many separate companies are hiding inside one name. The largest is Civil Aerospace, engines for large passenger aircraft, the Trent family. Thousands are in service worldwide. This is where the strange economics live. So it's where we'll spend most of our time. Then defense, military transport, combat aircraft, and the part nobody associates with the badge. Rolls-Royce designs and builds the nuclear reactors that power every submarine in the Royal Navy and has done for over 60 years. Long government contracts, predictable revenue, and completely indifferent to whether anyone books a holiday. Third, power systems. Built around MTU, the German engine maker Rolls-Royce finished acquiring in 2013. Ship engines, mining equipment, and increasingly the backup generators that keep data centers alive when the grid drops. No aircraft anywhere in it. Through the worst years of the last decade, it kept earning while the aviation side did not. 3 businesses running on 3 different clocks. And then there's a fourth thing worth noticing. Wow. Not something the company owns, but something it sold. In 2022, Rolls-Royce completed the sale of ITP Aero, a profitable Spanish subsidiary making turbine components for a reported 1.7 billion euros. Profitable subsidiaries are the last thing a healthy company sells. Keep that sale in mind. It's the receipt for something we haven't reached yet. So, the meter. A water utility doesn't sell you water in bottles. It puts a meter in your house, largely at its own expense, then bills you for everything that flows through it. The meter is a cost. The flowacity is the business. Nobody at the water company lies awake worrying about the price of meters. Rolls-Royce runs that model in the sky, and the industry has a name for it. Power-by-the-Hour. The idea dates to the 1960s. The modern version is branded TotalCare. Instead of an airline buying an engine and then paying for repairs whenever something breaks, the airline pays a fixed rate for every hour that engine spends in the air, and Rolls-Royce takes responsibility for keeping it working. 3 terms, and the whole thing opens up. The first is engine flight hours, the meter reading. Not tickets sold, not aircraft delivered, hours in the air. That is the unit Rolls-Royce actually bills. The second is the installed base. Every engine of theirs currently hanging under a wing somewhere in the world. Thousands of large civil engines. Every one a meter, spinning or still. The third is the shop visit. The moment, usually years in, when an engine comes off the wing and goes into a workshop to be stripped and rebuilt. Under Power-by-the-Hour, the airline has already been paying by the hour. The bill for the rebuild lands on Rolls-Royce. And that inverts the basic logic of manufacturing. Normally, you want the product to wear out. That's when the customer comes back. Here it's reversed. Rolls-Royce has contractually agreed to fix the engine at its own cost, so every hour it runs without needing attention is pure margin, and every early failure is a direct hit to its own accounts. The maker is financially punished for building something that doesn't last. There's a second inversion, quieter and more consequential. Rolls-Royce doesn't get paid when an airline buys an aircraft. It gets paid when that aircraft flies. Two airlines can own identical engines, and the one flying 12 hours a day is worth several times more than the one flying 4. Now take one more piece because it detonates later. In 2012, Rolls-Royce sold its share of the joint venture that made engines for narrow-body jets, as the short-haul workhorses, the 737s and A320s that make up most of the world's fleet, to Pratt and Whitney for a reported $1.5 billion. It cashed out of short-haul. From that day on, almost every meter Rolls-Royce owned was bolted to a long-haul aircraft. One last thing about the model. For years, the accounting let Rolls-Royce estimate the profit it expected across a 25-year service contract and book a large slice of it the moment the engine was sold. In 2018, the rules changed, and the company could only count the money once it had actually done the work. Reported profits for earlier years came down sharply. Nothing about the business had changed. Only the story it was permitted to tell about itself. Because underneath all of it sits a piece of metal about the size of your hand. A turbine blade in a large jet engine spins in gas hotter than the temperature at which the blade itself would melt. It survives for one reason: it's hollow. Cooler air is pumped through channels inside it and bled out across its surface, so the blade flies inside a thin film of its own air conditioning. Each one is grown as a single crystal of metal, because ordinary metal has grain boundaries, and grain boundaries are where cracks begin. Hundreds of those blades spin at over 10,000 revolutions per minute. Rolls-Royce's own engineers have described the centrifugal load on a single blade at full power as comparable to hanging a double-decker bus off it. That is the machine the company guarantees for 25 years. And the guarantee gets signed before anyone knows how the blade will actually age, because what kills it isn't the heat alone. It's what the air carries. Air over parts of Southeast Asia is humid and heavy with sulfur. Sulfur, water, and high temperature together produce corrosion. Corrosion eats the protective coating. Once the coating is gone, the cooling film stops holding, and the blade is exposed to the thing it was never meant to touch. An engineer at a test bench cannot know that in advance. He can model it. He can run accelerated tests. What he cannot do is fly the engine for 15 years in the real sky before signing a contract that assumes 15 years. So the hidden cost in this business isn't in a factory and isn't on a balance sheet. It's a bet placed decades ahead on how a hand-sized piece of metal will corrode in air nobody has measured yet. Rolls-Royce has lost that bet twice. The first time cost it its independence. The second time cost it around £2.5 billion. The first was 1971. In 1968, Rolls-Royce won the engine contract for Lockheed's new TriStar airliner, beating both General Electric and Pratt and Whitney. An American aircraft with a British engine, the biggest win in the company's history. The engine was the RB211, and its centerpiece was a fan blade made of carbon fiber composite instead of metal. Lighter than anything a competitor could offer, and the reason Rolls-Royce won. The first warning came on a test rig. Certification required the fan to survive a bird strike, which in practice means firing dead birds into a spinning engine. The composite blade shattered. Rolls-Royce fell back to titanium, heavier, less efficient, and a substantial redesign years into a program already running late. Here's the turning point. The Lockheed contract was fixed price. Every pound of overrun landed on Rolls-Royce, not the customer. Development costs ran far past the original estimate. The company borrowed against a payday that kept receding, and in February 1971, it ran out of cash and was handed to an administrator, legally insolvent. The British government nationalized the Aero engine business within days because the alternative was letting the Royal Navy's engine supplier disappear. Lockheed nearly went down with it and needed U.S. government loan guarantees to survive. What it proves, a business that gets paid over 25 years will kill you if you cannot fund the first 5. The second was the Trent 1000, and it was a launch engine for the Boeing 787. And it sold well, a large installed base with major carriers, exactly the position this model is built on. From around 2016, operators began finding that certain turbine and compressor components were degrading far faster than designed, and the worst of it appeared on humid, sulfurous routes across Asia. Under an ordinary warranty, that becomes an argument between manufacturer and airline. Under Power-by-the-Hour, there is no argument. Rolls-Royce had already agreed to keep the engines running. Then the consequences compounded. Engines had to come off the wing years early, but workshop capacity had been built for the original schedule, so aircraft queued for slots that didn't exist. At the peak, dozens of 787s stood parked around the world waiting for engines. Airlines leased replacements and sent the bill. Rolls-Royce built spare engines it had never budgeted for, bought maintenance capacity at speed, and compensated its customers. The company has put the cumulative cost of the program at roughly £2.4 billion. The cruelty is in the arithmetic. A grounded aircraft is a stopped meter and a running cost at the same time. One event cuts the revenue and raises the spending. Then 2020 stopped every meter at once. Long haul, the exact segment Rolls-Royce had concentrated itself into after walking away from short haul in 2012, fell hardest and recovered slowest. Large engine flying hours dropped by more than half. The company reported a statutory pre-tax loss of around £4 billion, raised roughly £2 billion from shareholders, and sold ITP Aero, the profitable Spanish subsidiary from earlier. That was the receipt. The chain took 8 years to run, concentrate into long haul, guarantee the maintenance decades ahead, discover the metal ages faster than the model said, then lose the hours. So what does this machine produce when it works? The optimistic version is formidable. Thousands of engines in service, each under contract for 20 years or more, in an industry with 3 serious competitors and a certification barrier that costs a decade and billions to clear. Once your engine is on a wing, it stays there for the life of the aircraft. Nobody swaps engines the way they swap suppliers. The realistic version is what 1971 and the Trent 1000 describe. Enormous cash out before any comes in, profitability resting on forecasts about metal fatigue 20 years ahead, and a revenue line hostage to whether people fly long haul at all. Collapse it into one sentence and the business is this. Rolls-Royce buys a claim on future flying hours by giving away the hardware, and everything depends on whether that claim holds. By 2024, with flying restored and costs cut hard, the company was reporting underlying operating profit in the region of £2.5 billion, an operating margin in the low to mid-teens. In plain terms, of every £100 moving through the business, something like 13 stays. For a company that gives its main product away, that number is the entire argument. Proven. The operator who mastered this model best isn't British. It's GE Aerospace, the same aftermarket logic at greater scale, and notably the one business General Electric kept when it took itself apart. Now for the second gap. The first gap in this story was between what Rolls-Royce looks like and what it is. There's a second gap of exactly the same shape, between what the business earns today and what the market is willing to pay for it. A share price is not a scorecard for last year's profit. It's a price attached to an assumption about the future, like buying a vending machine not for the coins sitting in it tonight, but for what you believe it will take in over the next 20 years. The assumption inside Rolls-Royce is specific, that the meters keep spinning, that long-haul flying keeps growing, that the installed base ages into profitable shop visits, and that the metal wears out on schedule rather than early. Break any one of those, and the price is measuring something that no longer exists. Another durability problem breaks it. A shock to long-haul demand breaks it. And there's a slower one. Rolls-Royce still has no engine in the short-haul market it left in 2012, and the next generation of single-aisle aircraft is already on the drawing board. This is an explainer, not financial advice. No view here on what any of it is worth. Rolls-Royce doesn't make cars. It doesn't really sell engines either. It hands you a very expensive meter, helps you bolt it to your aircraft, and then bills you for the sky.